Hi and welcome back. So today something completely new. The last time we talked about basics with helpers, mixins, plugins and stuff like that. So today I'm starting with something new. Quite some people ask me about data binding, and the first thing I would like to start with is with a custom reader, which leads us to a store, which leads us to, and so on, so that we get one step by step to data binding. In the beginning, I will start with taking you already work with data binding and that you would like to know more about it. So if you follow this course, at the end, you will definitely know what data binding is. But for now, let's take a look into a custom reader. And let's take a look into what I prepared for you today. So let's take a look at it. I am assuming that we get data from the backend, which hasn't been set up properly so that we can use it right away. What we want to have at the end is a store, a grid, which shows these data. And our data are in here, which is John Luke, which is a name, with some details with the email and the phone. But everything is somehow awkwardly set up, and at the same time, in our grid, we do not have columns. But instead of that, the columns are sent from the backend with all the information which is necessary to set up the columns. So somehow we have to take this single call. So we are asking the server, give us the data for our store, and this is the answer. And all we have is a binding to a store personal and a grid model, which has the store, not grid model, it's my view model, which I named grid. And this one has a store. And inside the store, we have a proxy with a reader. And the URL is our symlet, which you saw in here. This is what we are asking for. And the reader is personal reader. So let's take a look at our docs. In Sencha, it doesn't matter the version. And we're going for reader. And in here we get the reader, which says, okay, there is a JSON reader, which most of you typically use. So typically what you write is reader, increase the size, not that much. Okay, so the reader type JSON, that is what you typically would use if you have a proxy with an Ajax call or REST call. And whatever this means, this is the standard, but there is nothing like a personal reader. So where does this personal reader now comes from? I've set up a file which extends from xDataReader JSON, which is this one. Sorry for that. And I added an alias with a reader, personal reader. So whenever my store proxy reader is looking to solve this, it will simply say, okay, this must be reader.personalReader as an alias. That's what it is looking for. So this is why it uses my personal reader. Now, if you write your own reader, there are two things which you should be aware of. The first one, the most important one, is transform. You can add right away a function in here, or you can add a string and resolve it in your own custom function. You could even add a scope, whatever you would like to do. I personally prefer to have the original configs up here and only use the function name as a for transform. So that's why I'm using in here transform data. This one is doing some crazy stuff, and it will return our data readable to our store. And now we are right away in what is a reader doing. A reader will transform the incoming data into a readable form for the store, so that the store knows, oh, data for my records. It takes the data and transforms them into a record. So, but we have to somehow get the incoming data into a form that the store can read. So that's what the reader is doing. And let's take a look in here. So the first thing, what is data up here? Data, if you are going with a JSON reader, it already, let me just take the, oh, it's in here. So it typically, now I'm going into here and into network to show you network. And now let me see, check, open the, so personal JSON. So what we get as an answer is this. This is a string typically that's delivered from the backend to the front end. And from this string, we have to make this a JSON. And that's what the JSON reader is doing. So we are extending from this JSON reader, and the data in here will automatically be already a JSON. So we do not have to care about how do we get a string into a JSON. This already is a JSON. Let me just add here a debugger, and we can take a look at, into that data string at that point. So now it's built, and we are right here. And if we take a look in here, we can see columns and data. That's exactly what we get. So we already have an object with columns and data. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to fire an event on the reader, and we just name it response columns or whatever you choose in here. This is a custom event. And we add the data columns. As you saw in here, data columns. This is what we are passing with that event. And within that, we have an array with 3 items, data index name, full name, flex 0.4. So everything is fine for that. Just keep that in mind. We are going back into that later, how we get the columns. Okay. So right now, what is data? Data for us is here an array, again with 4 items, and this awkward structure. Right? Now, with this functionality in here, I'm getting, let's just continue in here what we get at the end. Let me just add this here, F8. So now we are returning the full object, but meanwhile we changed it into 4 items, which are exactly the way the store understands it. Now we have data and columns. How does it know which one to take? That's basically what we set in here with the root property. The root property says, follow this path, data. It could be something, if we would be deeper inside, let's say data my store dot personal. Something like that would be possible, but then we would have to have a data would have to be data is equal the object which we currently have, what we need for that. My store would be again an object, and in here, oh sorry, yeah, personal, with an array of items. So if you would have something like this, data, my store, personal, then you would use these dots in between. Okay, but for now we only have data because we look in here. Here we want the data path. And in that we have all our data. And that's why this one, F8, fills in all the data. So our personal reader transforms the incoming data, which is already a JSON because we are extending from a JSON reader. And from that, we are returning the new structure that we want the store to read. Okay, I guess that's pretty clear right now, is it? So we have in here our store, and autoload true. If you do not set that, it will be false and it won't trigger loading right away. So we have a type of Ajax, so it's a simple Ajax call, our URL, our custom reader, and the root property. Now everything is set up. But how do we get from this event firing with our columns into our view? So let's take a look at our grid. Down here, I did a small override. You typically would do an override for all stores if you use that functionality more often. For me, what I did is I'm just saying, okay, when the store gets set, let's take a debugger look in here too. When the store gets set up, at that point, nothing has really been done. We want to add the store. We already know what the store is, as you can see in here. The store definition is clear. It seems to be already a real store because it has an ID and all that kind of stuff. So we want to add this store to our grid. At that point, I'm saying, get me the proxy, get me the reader. Oh, you can see that in here better. Get me from the store proxy, get me the reader. And whenever the reader fires response columns, then fire the same event on the grid. Me equals this, me is the grid in here. Fire the event on the grid response columns with grid as a first argument and the layout as a second argument. And then do whatever Sencha typically does on set store. Just like that. Just be aware there's no update store or apply store for set store. It's run differently by Sencha. So otherwise I would have used update store. Whoever watched my previous videos, I did a lot on configs, then this might make sense for you. So set store. And I'm firing the event on the grid response columns. And in here you can see this is my custom event. So at the same time, we are explaining custom events. Whoa, that's cool. So in here we are firing the event from the reader on the reader so that everyone else can listen to the reader when something changes and or happens. And we are firing the columns have changed, or I know a new definition of columns, listen to me. And the grid says, yeah, I'm listening to you, give me the update. And with the update, it says, fire that on myself so that we can use this the standard listeners config, and we say, if that event fires, go and handle this. And that's in our main controller, and it just says grid, which was the first item, the first parameter which we set in here. Dear grid, set the columns to the new columns definition. And voila, that's it. We're getting our definition in here from the backend. Remember, we started with this awkward definition, and then we added the data and the columns. Now, what if we want to remember exactly the data, how they were sent? Let's take a look in here. So we are going for X store manager. Whenever you add a store ID to a store, like I did in here, the store manager will grab that, and you can actually, by saying get, and I'm adding the ID, which I said here is personal ID, will give you the store. And then we are saying dot get proxy, get reader. And now what we, let's just add reader equals reader dot. And now we want our raw data. And out of the box, you see keep raw data. Remember we had that when we set up the personal reader? In here it says keep raw data. So right now we see nothing. Now let's change this to true. Rerun it. Might be we still have some debuggers in there. Yeah, in here, F8. And now we just repeat the same reader and raw data. And you can see now the reader remembers the original data which were passed in here after we transformed them. It keeps these data if you set it to true. And that's why this is the second important switch config, which I mentioned in the beginning. If you need these data later on, you have to set keepRawData to true. Typically, you don't want to use that. So false. And there's a good explanation. keepRawData should be in here too. keepRawData, because they're saying, yeah, see, if you're keeping the raw data, this might cause some problems later on, and that's why they recommend, before you run into memory leaks, it's better that you switch them to false. So if you're using keepRawData, just be aware to check later on if these raw data have been deleted before you destroy the reader. It's just a precaution. I set these to false, but sometimes you might need the original data later on. Okay, so that's it for today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead. And if you liked it, if you would like to know more about stores, proxies, readers, just write it to the comments. And just remember, next Friday, I'm going to talk about a comparison between XJS and a really, really modern framework. And if you're more than welcome to join on Friday. So, see you later.